The night air outside the glittering glass tower of Braxton Global shimmered with neon lights, but inside the grand ballroom, silence pressed down heavy as a storm. The chandeliers threw golden fire across the marble floors, catching every sequin, every jeweled dress, every polished shoe. Billionaires, politicians, and industry titans filled the room, sipping champagne, laughing too loudly, sealing deals with nothing more than a handshake. To them, tonight was just another night of power and excess. But for a young black waitress, named Maya, every second here felt like walking barefoot. Across shards of glass, her hands trembled slightly as she balanced a silver tray of crystal flutes. The murmurs of wealth and arrogance swirled around her like smoke. She'd been invisible to these people for months, and that was how they liked it. Waitresses were background, never voices. But tonight would change everything. Tonight her voice would shake the walls of this golden hall. At the far end of the room, seated at a velvet-draped table, was Alexander Braxton himself, the billionaire, the king of this empire. He leaned forward, pen in hand, ready to sign a contract that would ripple across the world. The document on the table looked like nothing more than paper, but Maya knew better. She had seen it when the careless assistant left it unattended. She had read enough, understood enough. What was written there was poison, an agreement that would strip hundreds of workers of their rights. Their homes, their futures, families, like hers, would be crushed. Maya's voice caught in her throat as she approached the table with the tray. Her whole life had taught her silence, obedience, endurance. But something in her chest burned like fire. Her mother's tired face, her brother's empty stomach, the eviction notice still taped to their front door. Those memories pushed her forward. She lowered the tray to the table with practiced grace. But instead of stepping back, she did something unthinkable. Her voice cut through the polished laughter, soft but sharp as broken glass. "Don't sign that." The entire room froze. Glasses stopped mid-air. Conversations shattered into stunned silence. Heads turned. A waitress had spoken. Worse, a black waitress had dared to speak to Alexander Braxton. Braxton's pen hovered above the paper. Slowly, his steel-gray eyes rose to meet hers, cold and calculating. His lips curled into the faintest smile, but it carried no warmth. "Excuse me," he drawled, his voice echoing with the weight of entitlement. Maya swallowed, her palms slick with sweat, but she stood straighter. "Don't sign that paper," she repeated, louder this time. Her voice cracked, but it carried. "It's wrong. You know it's wrong." Gasps broke out across the ballroom. A senator's wife clutched her pearls. A banker muttered under his breath, "Who does she think she is?" The assistant, a thin man in a tailored suit, jumped forward, hissing at her. "Step back, now, you're out of line." But Maya didn't move. Her whole body shook, but her feet felt rooted to the marble floor. She could feel every eye in the room cutting into her like knives, but she pressed on. "That contract, it will destroy lives. Families will lose everything. People like my mother, who's worked in your factories for 20 years, will be out on the streets. You can't just sign it like it's nothing." The assistant reached for her arm, but Braxton lifted a hand, stopping him. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, regarding her like a curious insect. "And what do you know of this contract?" he asked softly, his voice dangerous in its calmness. Maya's throat tightened. This was the moment. If she faltered now, she'd lose everything. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I know enough," she said. "I know what happens when rich men make promises on paper and poor people pay the price." A murmur rippled through the room. Some chuckled dismissively, others whispered uneasily. But Braxton's eyes narrowed, studying her with a predator's patience. He tapped the pen against the paper, then set it down deliberately. "Interesting," he said. "A waitress with an opinion. Tell me, girl, what makes you think your words carry weight here?" Heat rushed to Maya's cheeks, humiliation clawing at her. She heard the snickers, the whispers. She'd be fired. She's insane, but something inside her refused to bow. Her voice trembled, but her conviction grew. "Because I've lived the consequences of decisions like yours. Because I've seen what happens when no one speaks up. And because sometimes the truth comes from the people you'd rather not hear." The silence that followed was suffocating. Braxton's lips twitched, almost amused, but his eyes burned with challenge. Finally, he leaned forward, folding his hands. "Very well," he said. "You've interrupted my evening. You've embarrassed yourself in front of every powerful person in this room. Convince me. Tell me why I shouldn't sign this." The assistant gaped at him. "Mr. Braxton, surely you can't quiet." Braxton snapped without looking at him. His attention stayed locked on Maya, sharp as a blade. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Convince him, in front of everyone, She could feel the walls closing in, but she took a shaky breath. Because the ink on that paper is built from the sweat of people who don't get to sit at tables like this, she said. Because behind every number in your spreadsheets is a family. A mother who skips meals so her kids can eat. A father who works double shifts and still can't afford his medication. A girl like me, working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. That paper doesn't just steal money, it steals dignity, futures, hope. Her words rang out raw and unpolished, but they carried something the contracts and speeches in that room never did. Truth. A woman at one of the tables shifted uncomfortably. A man cleared his throat, eyes darting away. The arrogance in the air cracked just slightly, like glass under strain. But Braxton wasn't moved, at least not visibly. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. Touching, he said. But emotion doesn't run companies. Numbers do. And unless you can show me numbers, miss, what was your name? Maya hesitated, then lifted her chin. Maya Thompson. Unless you can show me numbers, Miss Thompson, Braxton continued smoothly. Your speech is nothing more than noise. The laughter that followed cut deep, cruel and sharp. Maya felt her knees weaken. For a moment, shame threatened to drag her back into silence. But then she saw her mother's face again, lined with exhaustion. She heard her little brother asking if the lights would be turned off again this week, and she straightened. Then, maybe it's time someone taught you that people are worth more than numbers, she said, her voice steady now. The room erupted, some laughing, some gasping, some shaking their heads. But Maya didn't flinch. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. And in that electric moment, with the whole room watching, Maya Thompson realized she had just ignited a fire that no amount of money could put out. Asterisk, the tray in Maya's hands trembled, but she didn't let it drop. Her words still echoed through the cavernous hole, bouncing against marble pillars and gilded walls, daring anyone to erase them. A hush lingered, broken only by the faint clink of ice in untouched glasses. The guests were waiting, some for her to be dragged out, some for Braxton's wrath, some simply for more spectacle. The assistant, sweating through his tailored suit, hissed again at her side. This is ridiculous. Mr. Braxton, I'll remove her immediately. Sit down, Howard, Braxton said coldly without taking his eyes off Maya. The assistant froze mid-step, lips snapping shut like a trap. Braxton leaned forward, resting, his elbows on the table. You've disrupted my evening, Miss Thompson, yet, strangely enough, I find myself curious. Tell me, what makes you think your voice, a waitress's voice, should influence decisions worth billions? Maya felt the heat rise in her face. All around her eyes glared, mocked, or rolled with disdain. She wasn't supposed to exist in this world. She was supposed to be invisible, silent, obedient. But her voice had already broken through, and she couldn't take it back. She steadied her breath. Because billions don't keep food on our tables, she said quietly, but firmly. Because the people who built your empire, who clean your floors, who pack your products, they're not numbers, they're human, and their lives are the weight of every dollar you count. The laughter that rippled through the crowd was sharp, derisive. A woman in diamonds muttered, "How dramatic." Another whispered, "She's trying to make a scene." Braxton didn't laugh. He just studied her, expression unreadable, eyes hard as steel. "You speak boldly," he said at last, "but boldness without consequence is meaningless." He leaned back in his chair, gesturing faintly. "You know what this contract represents? Expansion, efficiency, profit. If I don't sign this deal, my competitors will. Thousands of jobs will vanish instead of being reshaped. What you call destruction, I call survival." Maya's heart hammered. She wanted to crumble under the weight of his logic, but she pushed back. Survival for you. Survival for men in this room who already have more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. What about survival for families like mine? For mothers who skip medicine so their kids can eat? For workers breaking their bodies to line your pockets? Survival shouldn't only belong to the rich. The words landed like stones in water, rippling across the faces in the room. Some smirked, dismissing her as naive, but a few shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. Braxton tilted his head, a faint smile tugging his lips. "So what you're proposing, Miss Thompson, is that I throw away billions for sentiment?" Maya swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed she was about to be destroyed in front of the world's most powerful people. But then she thought of her mother's cracked hands, her brother's worn-out shoes, the eviction notice on their door, and she refused to bow. "I'm asking you to remember what power is for," she said softly, though the words rang clear. "Because power without responsibility isn't leadership, it's tyranny." A murmur swept through the hall. A senator coughed awkwardly. The diamond-clad woman whispered harshly to her husband, but he didn't respond. He was staring at Maya, conflicted. Braxton's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. Tyranny, he repeated, almost tasting the word. His fingers tapped against the table, deliberate, controlled. Then he chuckled low, shaking his head. You have courage, I'll grant you that. But courage without wisdom is just noise. He picked up the pen again, twirling it between his fingers. Tell me, Miss Thompson, what wisdom do you have? Numbers, facts, or just stories meant to tug at heartstrings? Maya's stomach knotted. He was right, she had no spreadsheets, no charts, no degrees, only truth. But truth was all she had ever needed to survive. She stepped closer to the table, ignoring the assistant's gasp. Her voice steadied. You want numbers, I'll give you 140. That's how many hours my mother works every week in your factory, sometimes more, and yet she brings home barely enough to pay rent. Another number 2. That's how many jobs I work just to help keep the lights on. 1 here, 1 scrubbing floors at night. 3. That's how many eviction notices we've gotten in the past year. You want numbers? They're carved into our bones. The room fell silent again. Her words hung heavy in the air. Even the cruel laughter had died down. Braxton's smile faltered, just for a flicker, before his mask slid back into place. He leaned forward, pen still in hand. And what do you expect me to do, Miss Thompson? Save the world? No, she said simply. Just don't destroy it more than you already have. The ballroom crackled with tension. Every breath felt dangerous, every glance sharp. Then, with a slow deliberation that made the room lean forward, Braxton placed the pen down again. He looked at her with a predator's patience, as though deciding whether she was worth devouring or sparing. Very well, he murmured. If you are so convinced this contract is poison, then prove it. Stand before this room of power and prove your claim. Gasps broke out. The assistant sputtered. Mr. Braxton, this is absurd. She's a waitress. Not. Braxton silenced him with a glance. If she wants her voice to matter, let us see if it can withstand the weight of truth. His eyes flicked back to Maya. You have until midnight. Convince me and, the more I sign. The crowd erupted into whispers. Some laughed, eager for her humiliation. Others leaned in, curious. A few frowned, uneasy. Maya's knees trembled. Midnight. Convince him. Convince a room full of wolves in silk suits and diamond necklaces. She was a waitress, not a lawyer, not an activist. She had no stage, no plan, just her voice. But her voice had carried this far, and deep in her chest, fire burned brighter. She lifted her chin. Then I'll prove it, she said. The words left her lips before she could second-guess them, and with that, the clock began ticking. The assistant stared at her in disbelief. Fury etched across his face. The guests murmured like an audience, hungry for blood, and Braxton leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk curling across his lips, as though he had set the perfect trap. But he didn't know Maya Thompson. He didn't know that when her back was against the wall, that was when she stood tallest. And as the band in the corner struck up a hollow tune, as the glittering masks of the powerful turned toward her, Maya knew she had just stepped into the fight of her life. The music in the ballroom swelled again, but it didn't mask the unease twisting through the guests. Their jeweled laughter felt forced now, their conversations brittle, their eyes darting again and again toward the young waitress who had dared to challenge Alexander Braxton. Maya stood at the edge of the billionaire's table, her tray now abandoned on a sideboard, her hands clenched at her sides. Midnight, that was the deadline he'd given her, and already she felt the weight of every tick of the clock pressing against her ribs. The assistant Howard stormed toward her, his face red with fury. You've lost your mind, he hissed in a voice sharp enough to cut. Do you realize what you've done? You're finished here. You'll never work in this city again. Maya swallowed the rising tide of fear, but her eyes stayed locked on him. If I'm finished for telling the truth, then so be it. Howard's lips twisted. The truth? You're a waitress. What truth could you possibly understand about business, about survival at this level? He leaned closer, venom dripping from his words. You're nothing here. Nothing. The words pierced her, dragging up every memory of being dismissed, overlooked, silenced. Every time a teacher had doubted her because she came from the wrong side of town. Every job where customers treated her like furniture, not human. Every landlord who sneered when she begged for an extension. Nothing. That word had followed her all her life like a shadow. But tonight she refused to let it own her. She squared her shoulders. If I'm nothing, then why is your boss listening to me instead of you? Howard's face flushed darker, and for a moment his hand twitched like he might strike her, but the sharp, amused voice of Braxton cut across the tension. Howard, stop embarrassing yourself. The assistant froze, then stepped back reluctantly, his jaw tight. Braxton's eyes, however, stayed fixed on Maya, gleaming like steel, catching the light. "You have until midnight," he repeated. "I suggest you use the time wisely." The clock above the ballroom doors chimed 10:30. An hour and a half, 90 minutes to prove herself before a man who could crush her life with a flip of his wrist. Maya turned slowly, scanning the glittering hall. The crowd had scattered back into conversations, but their eyes still cut toward her, full of judgment and curiosity. She could feel their whispers trailing behind her like smoke as she walked, each step heavy, but steady. She didn't know yet what she would say, or how she could possibly win, but she knew she couldn't stay still. She slipped behind the curtains. Near the service hallway, her breath ragged, her friend and fellow waitress Lila rushed to her side, eyes wide with terror. "Maya, what did you do? Oh God, do you know who that is? You'll be blacklisted forever." Maya pressed her trembling hands against the wall, trying to steady herself. "I didn't plan it," she whispered. "It just came out. But I can't let him sign that contract, Lila. I saw what it said. If he signs, our people will lose everything." Lila shook her head, her curls bouncing. "You can't fight men like him. They don't listen to us. They don't even see us." Maya looked at her friend, desperation and determination clashing in her chest. "Then maybe it's time they do." Lila grabbed her hand, squeezing tightly. "You're going to get hurt. Maya, I'm scared for you." "I'm scared too," Maya admitted, her voice breaking for the first time. "But my mother can't take another layoff. My brother can't keep living with empty cupboards. If I don't try, who will?" Lila's eyes welled with tears, but she nodded, whispering, "Then fight. I'll cover for you as long as I can." Maya hugged her quickly, then turned back, toward the hall. The music still played, but the air had shifted. She could feel the clock ticking, every minute slipping through her fingers like sand. She needed a plan. She needed to make them hear her. And then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw him, an older man in a worn suit, standing by the far wall, unnoticed by the glittering crowd. His dark skin was lined with age, his hands calloused, his posture weary but proud. She knew him, Mr. Carter, one of her mother's co-workers from the factory. He looked out of place among the silken velvet, his eyes scanning the room with quiet disdain. Maya's heart leapt. She hurried over to him, lowering her voice. "Mr. Carter, what are you doing here?" He gave her a small, tired smile. "Deliveries. Someone had to bring the wine crates. I saw you standing up to Braxton. Brave girl." Her chest tightened. "I don't know if it was brave or just foolish. He gave me until midnight to prove why he shouldn't sign." Carter's eyes softened. "Then tell them the stories they don't want to hear. Tell them about the hands that bleed to make their profits. Tell them about the mothers who cry themselves to sleep because their children are hungry. They think they own the world. Remind them the world is built on our backs." Maya's throat burned with tears, but she nodded fiercely. "You're right. I don't know how to make them listen." Carter rested a rough hand on her shoulder. "Speak from the heart. They'll laugh at you, mock you, try to break you. But truth has a way of cutting through all the noise. Don't forget that." Before she could answer, a voice boomed from the center of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of the hosts called, "Mr. Braxton has prepared a special announcement tonight. But before that, it seems we will be treated to an unusual interlude." All heads turned. Maya froze. The spotlight was on her. Again, Braxton sat at his table, lounging like a king, waiting for entertainment, his smirk daring her to rise. "Miss Thompson," he said loudly enough for all to hear, "the floor is yours." Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was it. The trap had sprung. Slowly, with every eye piercing her like a blade, Maya stepped forward into the light. Her knees trembled, her palms slick, but her voice, when it came, was steadier than she expected. "My name is Maya Thompson, and I may be just a waitress to you, but tonight, I am the voice of the people you never see." The laughter came instantly, mocking and cruel. The senator muttered, "This is absurd." A banker scoffed, "We didn't come here for a lecture from the help." But Maya pressed on, louder now, her voice carrying, "You eat from silver plates while my neighbors wonder where their next meal will come from. You drink wine that costs more than we make in a month, while children go to bed hungry in the shadows of your factories. And tonight, you want to sign a contract that will take even more from us. But I won't let you ignore it anymore." The room shifted uneasily. Some laughed harder, but others fell silent, watching her. Braxton's eyes gleamed with challenge, but he didn't interrupt. Maya took another step forward. "You ask for numbers. Fine, I'll give you numbers. Do you know how many of your workers live below the poverty line while you celebrate record profits? 40%. Do you know how many of them can't afford basic healthcare? Over half. Do you know how many families in my neighborhood are one paycheck away from losing their homes? Almost all of them. Gasps broke through the crowd. A few guests muttered, frowning, uncomfortable with the truth she was laying bare. And do you know what happens when you sign papers like that? She demanded, her voice sharp now, trembling with passion. It's not just ink. It's not just numbers. It's my mother collapsing from exhaustion on her shift. It's my little brother asking why the lights don't turn on. It's fathers dying too young because they couldn't afford a doctor. That's what's on your paper. Her words hung in the air like thunder. The ballroom was no longer laughing. Some eyes burned with anger at her defiance, but others were listening. Braxton leaned back, his fingers steepled, his gaze locked on her like a hunter studying prey. Strong words, he said smoothly, but words are wind. Can you show us proof? Can you show us you're more than just noise in a room full of power? Maya's chest heaved. Proof? How could she show proof in a room where truth was drowned in champagne? She froze, panic clawing at her, and then, from the back of the room, Mr. Carter's voice rose, low but steady. I've worked 20 years in his factories. My back is broken, my hands are ruined, and I can barely feed my family. All eyes whipped toward him. The older man stood tall, his worn suit shabby among the glitter, but his voice rang with quiet strength. She's telling the truth. We've given our lives to this company, and it's never enough. You raise profits, we lose homes. You raise bonuses, we bury friends. The room rippled with shock. A worker had dared to speak in this temple of wealth, and suddenly, Maya wasn't alone. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising. This is proof. Look at him. Look at me. Look at every worker who carries you on their shoulders while you laugh at their pain. We are your proof. The silence was deafening. And for the first time, a crack appeared in Braxton's mask. Asterisk. The silence in the ballroom felt heavy enough to crush bone. No one sipped their champagne anymore. No one laughed. Even the string quartet in the corner faltered, their bows trembling against the strings as though they, too, felt the shift in the air. Alexander Braxton leaned back in his chair, his steely gaze sweeping over the room, his lips curled into that dangerous smirk again, but there was something else in his eyes now, a flicker, almost imperceptible, like a crack in polished glass. He tapped the contract with one long finger. Touching, he said finally, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as a knife. Very moving indeed. But sentiment is not substance. A few stories, a few dramatic words. Do you really think you can sway me with this? Maya's pulse hammered. In her throat, the weight of every eye in the room pressed down on her, daring her to break. But Mr. Carter stood steady at her back, and she drew strength from him. I don't want to sway you with stories, she said, her voice firm. I want you to look at what your signature means, to see the blood behind the ink. Blood, Braxton echoed with a dry chuckle. So dramatic. He turned to the crowd. This is what happens when the help forgets their place. They confuse emotion with reason, passion with power. They think noise can move mountains. Maya's fists clenched. Maybe mountains don't move because people like you never listen. Gasps rippled through the hall. A banker muttered, "She'll be arrested for this." Someone else whispered, "Braxton won't tolerate this much longer." But Braxton only laughed softly, shaking his head. Bold, very bold. But you forget something, Miss Thompson. This is my world, my room, my rules. He picked up the pen again, twirling it casually. And I am tired of games. Her heart lurched. Was he about to sign, right there, in front of her, after everything? But before the pen touched paper, a voice rang out from the crowd. Wait. All eyes turned. A woman in her 60s rose from one of the front tables, her silver hair swept elegantly, her gown shimmering like moonlight. Lady Eleanor Wexler, philanthropist, board member, and one of Braxton's oldest investors. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, fixed on him with quiet defiance. I would like to hear more from this young woman, she said. The crowd murmured. Lady Wexler's influence was legendary. If she sided with Maya, the balance could shift. Braxton's jaw tightened, but his smile remained. Eleanor, he said smoothly, you've always had a soft spot for theatrics, but surely you don't mean to give weight to this nonsense. I mean to give weight to truth, she replied calmly, and from where I stand, I see more truth in her words than in that contract. The ballroom buzzed with shock. Maya's chest tightened with hope, but also fear because she knew the battle wasn't over. Braxton's eyes darkened, and she could feel the storm building. He rose slowly from his chair, his presence towering, his voice echoing through the hall. Very well, he said. You want a show? Then let's have one. Let us test Miss Thompson's conviction. He gestured to the guards at the doors. Two men in black suits stepped forward, their gazes cold. The crowd shifted uneasily. Braxton's smile was icy. If she truly believes in her words, let her defend them against scrutiny. Let her prove herself before this room. And if she fails, his eyes cut into hers like knives. She will leave here in disgrace, and she will never set foot in my world again. Maya's knees threatened to buckle. Guard scrutiny. What kind of game was he playing now? But Lady Wexler's voice cut through. Enough intimidation, Alexander. If you believe she cannot withstand questions, then let her speak freely. The billionaire's smirk didn't falter, but his eyes blazed. So be it. Let her speak. The spotlight swung back to Maya, brighter, hotter. The room leaned in, waiting for her to collapse under the weight. She swallowed hard, her chest heaving. This was it. This was the moment she had to rise or fall. She lifted her chin, her voice trembling but strong. You want to test me? Fine. Ask your questions. But remember, this truth doesn't fear scrutiny. The hall erupted in whispers. The first voice came from the back, Senator Klein, his tone dripping with contempt. Tell me, Miss Thompson, do you even understand what's at stake here? Do you know how global markets function, or are you simply repeating sob stories because you want sympathy? The crowd chuckled cruelly. Maya's heart pounded, but she steadied herself. I may not understand every detail of global markets, she admitted, but I understand the cost of greed. I understand what it feels like when your father works himself into an early grave for a paycheck that can't feed his family. I understand watching my mother cry because she can't afford her medicine after 20 years of labor. And if your global market doesn't care about that, then maybe your market is broken. The laughter faltered. Senator Klein's smirk stiffened. Another voice called out, sharper. What gives you the right to speak on this contract? You're just a waitress. Maya's throat tightened, but she forced the words out. Yes, I'm a waitress. I serve your food. I clean your messes. I hear the things you say when you think no one's listening. I see the way you look at us, like we're invisible. But being invisible doesn't mean we don't exist. And tonight, you will see us. The hall buzzed again. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others frowned, perhaps for the first time truly thinking. Braxton's smile didn't move, but his hand gripped the pen tighter. Impressive, he said softly. But words alone won't change the ink on this page. Do you have anything else? Miss Thompson, anything real? Maya's mind raced. Anything else? Something real. And then she remembered the folded paper in her apron pocket. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. It was her mother's pay, stub-creased, worn. The numbers, painfully clear. She held it up high. This is real. 20 years in your factories, and this is what she brings home. Barely enough to survive. No health insurance. No pension. Just exhaustion. This is what your empire is built on. The crowd gasped. Some leaned forward, straining to see. Others looked away, ashamed. Lady Wexler rose again, her voice cutting through the noise. Alexander, you cannot ignore this. You've built your empire on exploitation. And tonight, the truth is laid bare. For the first time, the mask slipped from Braxton's face. His jaw clenched, his eyes darkened, his smirk vanished. The hall held its breath. Then, slowly, he leaned over the table, his voice low and dangerous. You think you've won, Miss Thompson. You think a piece of paper and a trembling voice can undo me. He picked up the pen again, twirling it with deliberate menace. But you forget I don't answer to you. I don't answer to anyone. The clock above the doors struck 11, 1 hour left, and in that moment Maya realized this battle was far from over. Braxton would not yield easily. If she was to win, she would need more than courage. She would need allies. She would need strategy. She would need to risk everything. Her voice rang out, fierce and unyielding. Then I'll make sure the world hears what you're about to do. The crowd gasped again, and Braxton's eyes, cold and burning, locked onto hers like a predator preparing to strike. The storm had only begun. The clock struck 11:30. 30 minutes until midnight. 30 minutes until Alexander Braxton would sign the contract, unless Maya could stop him. The ballroom had shifted from glittering arrogance to a simmering battlefield. Every guest caught between curiosity, discomfort, and fear. The young black waitress who had dared to defy a billionaire now stood at the very center of power. Her every breath watched, measured, judged. Braxton towered over her, his pen poised like a weapon. You've entertained us long enough, he said, his voice low and dangerous. But I am done with this charade. I built this empire. I answer to no one. And when the clock strikes 12, I will sign this contract, whether you cry, beg, or shout. Maya's chest heaved. But she did not back down. Her hands trembled, yet her voice rose clear. Then you'll sign knowing the world is watching, because I swear I will make sure everyone sees what you've done tonight. A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. A senator muttered, "She's bluffing." A CEO scoffed, "She has no platform." But Braxton narrowed his eyes. "The world," he repeated with a mocking chuckle. "And how exactly will a waitress make the world listen?" Maya hesitated, but then a voice rose from the back of the room. "Because she's not alone." Gasps broke out as a man in a cheap suit pushed forward, clutching a small camera. It was Jamal, Maya's cousin, a college student and part-time activist. He'd slipped into the event through the service doors, his eyes blazing with determination. "I've been streaming this entire exchange live," he said, holding up his phone. "Thousands of people are watching right now, and they're not laughing." The ballroom erupted. Guests leaped to their feet, demanding the guards shut it down. "This is outrageous. Turn that off. Security." Braxton's face darkened like thunder. "You dare?" But Maya's voice cut through the chaos, fierce and unyielding. "It's too late, Mr. Braxton. The world can hear us, and they'll know the truth before that pen ever touches paper." The guards lunged toward Jamal, but suddenly, Lady Wexler stepped forward, raising her hand. "Stop." Her voice carried the authority of decades of power, and even the guards hesitated. She turned to the crowd, her eyes blazing. "Are we really so afraid of truth that we would silence it? This young woman has shown more courage tonight than most of us have shown in our lifetimes." The guests froze, torn between fear of Braxton and the undeniable pull of truth. Mr. Carter stepped forward too, his voice steady. "I've given 20 years of my life to this company. Tonight, I will not be silent either." One by one, voices began to rise. A housekeeper stepped from the shadows. A janitor lifted his head. Workers who had slipped into the ballroom as staff began to speak, their voices trembling but strong, each one telling their story: poverty, exhaustion, families barely surviving while men in suits drank champagne bought with their sweat. The room trembled with a power no chandelier could dim. Truth spread like fire, igniting every corner, every whisper, every soul willing to hear. Braxton's hand shook as he slammed the pen down onto the table, his face twisted with fury. "Enough," he roared, his voice booming over the crowd. "This is my company, my world, and I will not be lectured by the likes of you." The hall shook with his rage, but for the first time, his power felt smaller, weaker, fragile. Maya stepped forward, her voice rising over his roar. "Then maybe it's time your world changed. Maybe it's time you remembered that empires are built by people and people can tear them down." The crowd gasped. Jamal's camera streamed every word. The guests shifted, no longer so certain of Braxton's invincibility. Lady Wexler's voice rang out, firm and unshakable. "If you sign that contract, Alexander, you will not only face Usu, will face the eyes of the world, and you will lose." Braxton's chest heaved, his face red with fury, but his hand hovered above the contract, trembling. Midnight loomed. Maya locked eyes with him, her voice soft but deadly certain. "You don't need to prove your power tonight. You need to prove your humanity. Put down the pen, Mr. Braxton. Show the world you are more than greed." The silence was unbearable. The clock ticked. 11-50-8. 11-50-9, and then, with a strangled growl, Braxton hurled the pen across the room. It clattered against the marble floor, echoing like thunder. "Fine," he spat. "You want your victory. Take it. But don't think for 1 second this is over." The room erupted not in laughter, but in cheers. Workers embraced. Guests whispered in. Lady Wexler smiled faintly, nodding toward Maya. "You've done what no one else dared." Maya's knees buckled, relief flooding her. Jamal caught her before she fell. Tears burned her eyes as she looked at the crowd, the workers, her cousin, Mr. Carter. She had done it. Against all odds, she had stopped him. Braxton stormed from the hall, his empire shaken, and for the first time in years, Maya felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't invisible. She was a voice. The clock struck midnight, and in that moment, the world changed. That as the cheers faded, Maya stood tall, her voice steady. "Power isn't measured by what you can take from people. It's measured by what you give back. Never forget that." And with those words, the story of the black waitress who warned the billionaire spread far beyond the ballroom, carried on. Whispers, cameras, and hearts hungry for truth. The moral is simple. Sometimes the smallest voice can shake the highest walls, because truth spoken with courage is stronger than power built on fear.